We want everybody to take their mountain. Their mountain is whatever ideas, dreams that have been put inside of them. We want to see the fullness of that expressed.
Whatever stage that somebody's in, I would just encourage to dream about, like, what are the talents that you have and what are the things that make you come alive.
Wherever there's brokenness, God has a kingdom revolution for every industry. Well, welcome to another episode of Take Your Mountain podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me actually our founding investor and original partner in Gratūs Capital, my dad, Jack Weimer. Welcome.
Hi.
So today we thought, in past episodes, interviewing with our other partners, kind of going through their background, what brought them to be partners. We thought it'd be kind of fun to rehash our investing kind of history together. Maybe just start off though with a little bit of history on yourself, kind of what brought you into your professional realm. When I got starting of age, where we started to do some things together.
Yeah. Well, I was always quite interested in electronics, and my dad was a mechanic, and I learned a lot about mechanics from my dad, but electronics always fascinated me, and I wanted to get involved in that. And I was very fortunate to have a series of different jobs, but I really spent like 36 years at one company, and I got to go from 5 employees to, I think we had about 400 employees by the time we were done. And I got to follow through that whole process. And along the way, I did get some equity in the company. And so as the company grew, and we ultimately went public on the New York Stock Exchange. And so I got some liquidity then. And then we were purchased by one of our competitors later on the stock market. And then I had another liquidity event related to that. And so that's what created my problem, which is when you have some money all of a sudden and you haven't had much money up until that point. Now what do I do?
That's great. We'll come back to that, but I want to go back to your childhood and middle school. As you shared with me, obviously, when it comes to this idea of purpose or passion or like what it is I'm going to do with my life, a lot of people either don't give it much thought, or if they do give thought, they almost like have so much thought that they're not sure what to do. They lack conviction. Maybe share a little bit how you came to decide what you wanted to do with your life professionally.
Yeah.
And how, at what ages, like how that process worked for you.
Yeah. From my earliest days, like when I was in, I think it was 6th grade, I was so interested in electronics and electricity, that my English teacher knew that I wanted to do this. He was, we had to write some kind of a paper in class, and he, at the end of the year, he made up a story about all the different students and tied it all together. And he made some comment about me shocking people, electrically shocking people, because I actually built something like that and had it there, as a 6th grader. So that was.
Do you remember like the first time, like electronics? You probably introduced me to even this subject, but do you remember? And for a lot of people, they don't think about electronics until.
Well, they had magazines, in the back of the magazines, they had these kits you could order. And at that time, safety was not a big issue. And I ordered a kit where you could build a transmitter, so I could transmit on an FM radio with this.
So these would have been magazines laying around.
Yeah, they
the
like
house?
Popular Mechanics or
Like
things
Grandpa
like
would have
that.
had?
Yeah, in the back. Well,
Yeah.
apparently I must have been interested enough. Mom, we had the magazine around, and in
Yeah.
the back of the magazine they had ads for different
Kids.
things,
Yeah, I still remember
things
that.
you
Back
could do.
for those of you that are born, after 1990, they have these things
Called
made out of
magazine.
paper and mail them to your house. It's so inefficient. But in the
Right.
back, they have the classified section, which always had all these interesting
Right.
projects, kits, things you could order. We used to get Popular Science, Popular
Right.
Mechanics growing up. So
And
you found one of these kits, and that was part of.
yeah, it
developing
had
your
a
interest.
number of different circuits you could build. It had vacuum tubes, which most people, what's a vacuum tube?
Yeah.
But it was something where I had to solder. I had learned how to solder in my dad's garage, and so I knew how to solder things. And I had to solder all the wires up, and it plugged into the wall. It had 110 AC that powered this thing,
Yeah.
and I was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years old in that area, and I hooked all this stuff up, and of course it had open wires everywhere on it. But it was a tremendous amount of fun, and I as a kid I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn about electronics.
And that was it.
That was it.
Done deal.
Done deal.
So when it came to, well, we'll kind of get to this later, but I think part of what we're trying to do, honestly, with podcasts and just interviewing different people is hearing different stories of how people discover purpose, how they live their life fully. And, I think, at least for me, what I've discovered is like that if you believe in God and a creator, that God puts these things inside of us, puts these desires, puts these passions. And I don't know about you, but the church I grew up in, they don't teach about that. That's something you got to figure out on your own. It's certainly not in the Bible or any place like that. What I learned, or what I came to believe, is that the desires of our heart, the good ones, the righteous ones, are there on purpose, and they're there for us to discover. And some, we might not know fully what it looks like. It might look in multiple careers, multiple directions, but for whatever reason, God decided at this point in time, you were born in 1956 when electronics were really taking off, put it on your heart that this is something awesome. And that was as simple as that for you, right?
Yeah, it was. And I was overwhelmed with curiosity.
Curious, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that led you, that basically was your North Star, right?
Yeah. And my hometown had a technical school that was right there. So it was an easy transition from high school into Valparaiso Technical Institute, Valpo, Indiana. And I did get some electronics in high school, so moving into Valpo Tech was very easy for me to do. And then I got a 2.5-year degree there in electronics technology, and for me, it scratched the itch, of the curiosity, and I was learning everything that I wanted to learn, and nothing I didn't want to learn.
Yeah. So fast forward a little bit. You're pursuing electronics, doing well. Not a great student in other areas, but in the areas that you had interest and desire,
Yeah,
very good student. But at some point, kind of, bringing in the spiritual. You grew up in a church, right?
yeah.
So maybe share a little bit how you had the North Star of like your passion for electronics kind of guiding you, and then how's your spiritual walk kind of blend in there?
Yeah. Well,
as you begin to take that more serious.
As a kid, I, not that I would recommend this, for everybody, but I kind of decided that I wasn't I did go to church like 3 times a week. I was at church all the time.
You check the boxes.
And I, heard every Bible story 100 times and so forth. But I had kind of decided that I was just going to be a kid until like I was 20,
Okay.
and 20 or 21, I guess maybe I was.
What did
21.
just being a kid mean to you?
Well, it just meant, like there were so many requirements, to be a good Christian and everything. And it just felt so burdensome.
So intuitively as a child, you're like, this is heavy.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to participate in that.
Well, it wasn't like I was doing bad things.
Right.
I was actually a quite responsible young person, but
the religiosity.
But reading your Bible every day, I hated to read. I mean, the worst possible. When I left high school, I had read one book cover to cover, other than, like Uncle Wiggly or some
Curious George.
Curious George. And so I hated to read. It was like my worst nightmare to be reading. And so that was part of it, and then when I got married at 20, and part of my vows was to be the spiritual leader of our home. And so, and a weird thing about me is like, if I say I'm going to do something, then I feel compelled to do it,
Mm-hmm.
And so in our early marriage,
So despite the religiosity, throwing that off, Bible says, let your yes be your yes, no be your no.
Yeah.
And by golly, that was something you believed in.
Yeah. And in my first year of marriage, my wife, Kathy, she, your mom, she had a job where she worked in the evening. So like I worked all day, and then I would come home and we'd eat together, and then she'd go to work. And so I had a lot of time on my hands in the evening. And I decided to start reading the Bible.
How'd you decide it? Didn't she call you out?
Well, she did. She kind of said, well, you said you were going to be, our spiritual leader, and I said, okay, I guess I can't argue with that.
So do you remember what precipitated that? Was it just kind of like...
It was just, she just wanted me to be a spiritual man.
Hey, we're all, we're doing this life now together.
Right.
What are you,
right.
What's your plan for
What's your plan?
Okay, that's as a 20-year-old, that's like a real question there.
Well, and I wasn't a person who thought about things and strategically. I did strategically know that I wanted to go study electronics, but it wasn't like I had some big plan for my life or whatever.
Or like a 5-step plan. I was just like, this is all I'm doing.
I love electronics and I love Kathy, and that's what
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, I started, and I realized when I started reading the Bible, because yes, I'd heard, many, many stories from the Bible all my life up until that point. And, but reading the Bible, I mean, for a person who hates to read, the Bible is this huge, thick book. Overwhelming. And, I had read one book cover to cover. And so I knew if I'm going to do this, and I really kind of made an agreement with God, which, it was basically me telling him what I was thinking. But it was like, I'm going to read this through. I'm going to try to believe everything that I've ever been taught, but I'm going to be checking to see if what I've been taught is what the Bible says, And I said, I hate to read, I hate to read. You've got to do something about that. I don't know what, but you've got to do something about that. So I read through the entire Bible in 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Wow. Did you figure out the number of chapters per day? I think Bible in a year is like 3 chapters a day. So
I had no plan. I opened to page 1
and just went. So cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation.
and I had plenty of time. Every night I had hours, and like from 6, Kathy didn't get home until 10. So
Yeah.
there were nights when she left and I was on the floor reading, and when she got back, I was still there.
Wow. So would you say, did you feel like the Lord like put a supernatural desire or ability to just hammer it out?
He did. I mean, I'm still not a fast reader. As an engineer, you read for comprehension. So reading fast is not, a requirement.
Yeah.
And it's good because I've never been a fast reader, but I have always had good comprehension. And so I just started at page 1 and went through the entire Bible.
Wow. That reminds me, I think I went through a similar phase. I think the way the Lord works, I've noticed is like there's different milestones and we might hit them in different orders, but like there is some rhyme or reason to the paths he takes us on. And one of them is taking the faith of your parents or whatever you've been taught or parents or whatever you absorbed, and then evaluating it deeply for yourself and say, hey, what is good and worth keeping and what can I let go?
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's what represented that. You hit that milestone at age 20.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is both of us had been part of a youth program at our church, and we started praying about things, just what to do, and we had an interest in maybe getting involved in some kind of youth ministry, and we had a campus life group that was in our area. We were away from home. We moved to Indianapolis, so we're away from everybody. I had no friends, no nothing.
Work and reading.
And I'm reading my Bible all the time. But we started praying about, maybe finding something. And then Kathy had been watching children. And so a woman had to come to the house to approve her for doing that. And that woman, her husband, was the campus life leader. And so we had prayed about it, and then within the next week,
somebody showed up.
She showed up, and her husband ran the campus life group.
Oh.
And so we began helping with that. And then that's when I started realizing how much I don't know about the Bible. Even though I'm reading it, like I found that I wanted to begin teaching the Bible to kids or whatever. And
best way to learn is to teach, right?
And so I actually I had a job at Bell Laboratories, the Bell system.
Bell, yeah.
I was
AT&T, and
I kind of had no idea what an incredible job that I got. I got to interview there, and actually, because of affirmative action, I got a job there.
White male? They had broke male?
They lowered the requirement for grade point average to, you had to have a B, a 3.0 or above, and I was a 3.05 or something. So I got interviewed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten interviewed. And then I got a job. And so I got a job at a wonderful place. I was working with PhDs and master's degree level people. But over that year, I decided that I needed more education. And I ended up going to, we prayed about it, and I ended up going to Moody Bible Institute. So after this guy who is so passionate about electricity decided I need to go to Bible school.
I need to learn more about this.
Yeah.
So at that stage, again, what was your level of understanding? Was it just simply, I need to know more, so this is the next logical step, and I don't have it figured out beyond that? Or what was your thought?
I was raised in this church environment, and so like it kind of stuck in my head, that, well, if I'm going to do this, then I should be a pastor, or I should be a minister of some kind.
Yeah.
And so I went to Moody thinking I would become a pastor. and thinking that God would call me to that.
Mm.
And in the process, I never felt the calling to become a pastor, and that was a little confusing for me.
Mm.
But so it took years for me to figure this out. But I finally got to the point where I realized He made me an engineer because that's who I am. But a good engineer, there's nothing wrong with you knowing a lot about the Bible, and it's going to pay you back the rest of your life.
Wow. So how long of a process was that where you came full circle, where you're like, all right, it was just electronics. Now I read the Bible and I'm like, I want to take my faith serious. So I'm going to go to Bible school. So now you kind of have these, I don't know if they're competing interests, but like you have these two things you're doing. How long of a process before you're like came to some sort of cohesive thought process?
Well, I'm not sure I've ever come to a cohesive thought process, but I
say integrated
yeah.
thought.
Well, it was a process, and that's a good word. But I went 2 years to Moody, and at that time, Moody, you had to go 3 years to Moody, and they didn't have a full degree, and I wanted to get a bachelor's degree because I had an associate's degree, but I wanted a bachelor's degree to go with it. And so I went 2 years to Moody, and then I transferred to Trinity, which is in Deerfield, Illinois, and it's just further north, about an hour north. And so I went 2 years to Moody, and then I started taking classes at Trinity. And there's a funny thing that happens when you're married, and you might start having children. And so my daughter was born in January 18th of that year, on my third year from going there. And I was going to school full time. I had gotten a job working at a company where I was working part time there. I lived at an estate in Lake Forest where I was the caretaker. So I was working 10 hours a week there.
Someone's carriage house.
And then my daughter arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And when I put all those things together, it was like, no, you're not going to do all these things simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. You got to prioritize something.
Right. And I had gotten a summer job.
You didn't get rid of Kristen?
We did not prioritize her off the farm. And so at that point, I decided I've got to fish or cut bait, I guess. And I decided to drop out of school, and I had gotten a summer job at an electronics company, and the guy really liked me and wanted to keep me on, but he knew I was going to school, and I was still working there part-time.
Was that guy Len?
That was Len, yeah. Len Foxman, good friend of mine. And I hadn't known him before that time. He's a good friend now. And I asked him if I could go full time, and he was actually quite happy to have me full time because that's what he wanted. And so I started working there, and I spent 36 years there.
Wow. So one of the ways that the Lord worked in this situation was purely economics, right?
It was
the financial.
It was the crazy reality that I had tried to live, and I realized this isn't happening, and we just had to change our priority.
Yeah. So this idea of pastorship, maybe not everyone, but I think a lot of people that want to take their faith serious, but at some point have to consider this calling, or like, am I supposed to go full time? Is that the time frame where?
Well, it took quite a while. I ended up going.
Did it feel like a compromise? Like when you're like, I'm going to go full time now. So
No,
I need to do that.
I didn't feel. I felt like it was exactly the right thing to do.
To do at that time.
So I wasn't like confused.
But there was still maybe an open.
It was still an unresolved thing about, am I going to do ministry or not? And I expected during that time at Moody I would get a calling.
Yeah.
And I never felt like I had that call.
Yeah.
And so it took a little bit of time. I ended up going to an adult education at that same school, Trinity International University, and I did get a bachelor's degree in applied Christian studies there, but it was really, by the time I graduated there, it was like 10 years after high school, and it kind of took that whole time frame. Yes, I was working in electronics. Yes, I was making money. Yes, I was doing good things. We were at a church actively involved working with youth, actually. And so I was using all my education,
Yeah.
My electronics and my Moody and Trinity education that I had gotten. It was all quite valuable to exactly what I was doing. And
so through your volunteer work,
yes,
you were working with the youth group and
Kathy and I were youth sponsors.
Bible study. That was all volunteer nights and weekends.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, we had about a dozen kids in the group, and we spent 4 solid years with them, running the youth group. And
so were you like the youth pastors, basically?
We basically were lay ministers.
They didn't have
they did have a staff person, a children's education person.
Yeah.
But she spent most of her time with the younger kids. And then Kathy really organized.
That would be like the children's ministry.
Yeah.
Pastor. There was really no youth pastor.
There wasn't a youth pastor.
So you're a small enough church.
Right. And Kathy was very gifted with, she's just very gifted, from a psychology point of view. And so she organized things, and she had been active in our youth group growing up.
Yeah.
And stuff. We went to the same church. I actually have known Kathy since we were in the nursery together, not working in the nursery,
like
as babies.
2 or 3 years old.
Yeah. Well,
even younger.
Yeah. When we were.
I guess you were.
Yeah. We were born 4 months apart.
4 months apart.
Yeah. So
you were in the same church.
We were together.
Families interlocked. Well, that's really cool. So this reminds me, actually, I just recently watched this movie called, I think it's called The Hill. It's about a baseball player from the 50s, 60s, true story. And the one scene that really stuck out to me, basically, from a young age, this young boy who had some disabilities on his legs just loved playing baseball. And was obsessed, kind of like with electronics, was obsessed with baseball. And his dad was a pastor. And what his dad, as a pastor, could not wrap his head around was how this baseball garbage had anything to do with the calling that God obviously had on his son.
Mm-hmm.
And really cool movie. But there's I think this won't spoil it, but there's a scene in there where there's this tension. Even in the boy, he's like, he idolizes his dad, has a strong relationship with God the Father. And he's also like, he knows this baseball thing is deep down. That's what he's meant to do. But he's also wrestling with, how does that align with this calling, with kind of the traditional way we've always thought about taking your faith serious. So there's a scene in there where kind of all comes to a head, and he comes to his dad, and he kind of gotten in trouble for pursuing what he knew deep down was in there. It'd be like you getting your hand slapped for putting electronics together or something like that. And it's like, get more serious, right? And anyways, he says in the scene, I choose both. It's not an either or. It's not God or what's on my heart, but like, no. Like, God God put this on my heart. So when I pursue that and I do it for His glory, when I give the credit, because everything, our life is given to us, everything we have, like we just show up here, right? So our very life, our body, skills, abilities, everything is a gift. And when we choose to use those gifts and give credit where credit's due, like I know for me, that was like an aha moment where it's like, oh, I don't have to deny who I was created to be. I like this investing. You like electronics? I like this like business stuff. What's this all about?
Right.
I got no one in my family that has that history. You had a mechanical background, but really no one in the family that had that electrical background. But God purposed that in you for that season and time, which little did you know would turn into a nearly 40-year career.
Yeah.
With a company, we'll get into that a little bit later, but a company that ended up, you were employee number 5,
yeah,
and grew from 5 employees to 50 to 100, got bought by private equity, taken public, and but I guess the point there is, if you're called to ministry, if you're called to be a pastor, that's cool. But just on a ratio perspective, just know that roughly 11/12 of humans, if we're following the old Levitical code, 1 of 12 tribes was set out and purposed to be the pastors, the lay people, full time in the ministry. Everyone else was out in the world.
Yeah.
And I've come to believe, like, when you have a relationship with God and you're seeking His presence and His understanding and His heart, when you bring that to the thing that you're doing, the secular, you're just building circuit boards, right?
Yeah.
You're just doing these things. When you bring that is fully living out who you are. And then everyone's situation. In this case, you also had your what is more traditional ministry by your volunteer time.
Yeah.
So you're able to scratch, I don't know, both itches.
Yeah. And like over the years, I was an elder like 3 separate times for 6 years apiece.
Yeah. So a lot of volunteer time. I remember growing up basically with the youth group. I remember falling asleep under the coffee table and some prayer meeting or something. You guys were singing and I just doze off. So that was actually part of my like normal my upbringing was just always having people around. You guys were very generous with your time, and that rubbed off on me, and I'm sure my other siblings, I would say similar things. Cool. So how did you, through this whole time, was there any angst, or like, I know some people can get kind of anxious about this stuff. Like, did you feel pretty internally aligned, I guess, through that whole process? Or were there areas where you're like, wow, maybe I need to, I know you looked at being a camp leader or something at some point.
At one point I was thinking about because I'm very skillful in fixing things, my dad as a mechanic, I just learned every tool and how to use it. And I'm very intuitive about mechanical things. And then when you learn electronics, you learn a whole new world. And I was fortunate to be exposed to just incredible stuff. And so, I know how things work. And so I was thinking about, I could definitely work at a camp and do things there. And at one point, I mean, we actually interviewed at a camp.
Yeah.
And just for various reasons, it was clear to me, no, that's not going to be good for us as a family, and so to me, it was kind of like I'd had the door closed on, ministry things.
So it's kind of like it's a little cliche, but like the open door, closed door.
Yeah.
You think you might have an itch to scratch, and it's in the back of your mind. So you're like, okay, well, to do my due diligence, I'm gonna at least see if this is a direction I'm supposed to go.
And I did do that multiple times, and I, as it turns out, I ended up being at a company where the owner of the company learned to depend on me and just treated me so well, and like, he was the kind of person, like, I don't care what your degree is, if you can do it, then
a little like Elon Musk.
Yeah,
like,
kind of like that.
Like, hey, I don't care what your background is.
Right.
If you can get the job done,
if you can get the job
and
done,
deal with my personality, then
yeah. And everything that he asked me to do, I did.
Yeah.
And I did it sufficiently well that he ended up making me the head of engineering. I was the head of engineering for like 13 years. And then when we were going public, I became the chief technical officer, and just things I never planned,
yeah,
never imagined, never hoped for, but amazing things.
We can go back a little bit. I remember you saying at one time, it's kind of going into my story with business and stuff, that you had an opportunity to become a partner. Was that, didn't Len come to you at some point and ask you if you wanted to?
Well, there was a point. Yes, I guess, in a certain way.
The late 80s, whatever,
yeah,
the early 90s, somewhere in there.
Right. And like, he was thinking about, the future, his future, like, what do I do with the company when I retire?
Yeah.
And so there's many options with a company. You can sell it outright. You can sell it to the employees. And in order to do an ESOP is an employee stock ownership program. And part of the reason for it is so that it is a way to sell the company.
But didn't he have a more overt, like,
well, this was really how
precursor?
This was really how it was intended to work.
Okay.
So
you guys ended on ESOP.
Yeah. And you need somebody in the company who has an ownership
mentality.
You have to have ownership in order to be, part of the management that's going to carry the company forward.
Yeah.
So that was part of, it was a way to do that. Now, ultimately, we chose not to go that direction, but we still started it. And I did get some equity in the company because of that. That's how it began.
Okay, so that was that would have been late 80s, 90s?
Yeah.
Because I remember you saying something along the lines, there was a little bit of negative in our family. It wasn't terribly negative, but being a business owner, I remember you making some comments about how hard it was and how much time you had to put into it, and that just wasn't for you. Can you share maybe a little bit?
Yeah, well, I had multiple experiences in my life, even as a child, watching other people who owned businesses.
Okay.
And
uncles, and like who was
our neighbor owned a golf course.
Oh yeah.
Right. So they
retail hours.
Right. And so they owned a golf course. I ended up working at a
gas station.
I did that too, but I worked at this company that they sold CB radios.
Okay.
And so this guy worked at the steel mill, but he owned a business, so it was a small business that he was doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was seeing, just how much of his, like, he was working full time and then he was trying to run a business, and just the pressure that it put on them, and how they were like all in,
Yeah.
And for me, I just felt like, wow, that's a big commitment. It's like, you're not going to do that and not be putting in like 80 hours, even though you're not sitting working someplace. Your brain is still working on your business. It's your business. And I just saw that happening with various people, and it's not like that was a bad thing, but for me, it was like, I don't want to do that. I definitely was thinking that's not for me, you know.
Okay. And was that like something you were pretty clear on going into Eagle Test, or was that something that got
It developed over time, you know, like I got to the point toward the end of my career where I was so happy to have Len be the owner
yeah,
of the company. And I realized, you know, my job is to make him, you know, he was a great salesman. He would go out and get business with people, and usually there was new business required new engineering.
yeah, it didn't.
And so he was a very optimistic salesman. And so my job was to make sure he wasn't a liar.
Turn his lies into truth.
turn his,
You know, I said I love
turn his exaggerations into
So you
truth.
got pretty clear at some point
Yeah.
that I think you shared with me like the boundaries that you put around your
Yeah,
work. Can you
and-
share a little bit like
Yeah, well,
family and work and how you looked at that?
you know, he was a great, a very hardworking guy, and there were periods of time where things got tough, and like he was putting in 80 hours a week, easy,
Yeah.
80, 90 hours a week, and I just, you know, between Kathy and I, it was like there is no way that we're going to put business in that place.
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of the reason I didn't want a business, because I felt like it could easily draw you into that. Because you can't control what's going to happen. And so I felt like, you know, I averaged probably 55 hours a week, because I felt like kind of position I'm in, I need to put in, you know, 110 or 120%, whatever it is. I need to do that. But that's it, you know, and I tried not to work on weekends. I did travel, you know, at times, but, you know, I had a system where I could put in 55 hours and not be there on Saturday and not be there on Sunday.
You tend to get there earlier.
I would get early to work.
So we generally wouldn't see you in the morning.
Right.
But
I'd be home at night.
What you were looking back when I think, you know, different people's growing up, if I ever wanted to play catch or anything,
Right.
I mean, I can't remember the number of times you'd ever say no. Like you were.
Yeah. Well,
you were
almost
always
in the sun when the weather was good.
Yeah.
Every night we would probably go out and throw.
Yeah, I can't
throw
think
the
of it.
ball.
It's like you answer the phone today. Like you always
Yeah.
answer the phone. But
Yeah.
Was that a conscious
Yes.
decision, or like how did you?
Well, I
come
mean,
to
it
that?
was, you know, you only have your kids for a certain
blink.
blink of time, and you got to make the most of it.
Like that's pretty obviously true, but a lot of people struggle with that concept, whether it's feeding themselves or chasing
Yeah.
goals. How did you come to that?
Well,
conclusion?
it is a spiritual decision, you know, and I felt like one, and I can't remember where this verse is, but there's a verse, I think in Psalms or Proverbs, some places. It talks about how God blesses us even when we're sleeping, you know, and it's
Wow.
like, oh, and I just really held on to that as like, I'm not, that was a boundary. I'm not going to give my entire life to this
To this
business. And if I get fired or whatever happens,
So be it.
so be it. But, and I feel like, my boss, Len, he honored that. I think he honored me just seeing that I made that a boundary. And, I don't, I don't know all the reasons why actually, but, he allowed me to work 55 hours a week, and I was able to do, you know, very good things with that amount of time. And I refused basically. And I had opportunities within the company to get into sales and stuff. And that would have meant I was traveling all the time,
Mhm.
and I would have been putting in hours away from home, and I would have been making a lot more money at that time.
Yeah.
And it was just like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna. I like the way things are, and I'm set up these boundaries.
So a couple things come to mind. First of all, if you hadn't read the Bible, you wouldn't have known necessarily that verse. You might have picked it up in some sermon or something. But I've just been learning, the Lord's teaching us that the Bible, the reason the Bible is so powerful is those words, if we believe them to be true, that we can actually stand on them. There's like a legal system in the Spirit, but it requires us to stand on them, which in this case means, I either believe this or I don't. I either believe God's got my back, and this is a healthy. You still work your tail off, right?
Mm.
This isn't, mailing it in 55 hours. I remember you just being a very fastidious worker, but it required you to put the Lord to the test.
Well,
in a way, right?
And another time that was also a very deep spiritual test, if you will, is at some point your kids need to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And like at that point in time, we had always tithed. They everybody tells you, well, you got to put money away for your kids to go to college. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And then, oh, by the way, yeah, you're supposed to tithe because you get that from church. But everybody else in the world tells you all the things you need to save for the future, save for retirement, do all these different things. And I was the only one working. So, and I did
chose to have a stay-at-home mom.
Right.
Yep.
And I did make a decent income, but there was no way we could do all those things and tithe and put money away. And so we chose to tithe, and we had enough income to live on, and we did not have money put away to send kids to college and stuff. And when it came time, my daughter wanted to go to Bethel College in Minnesota. That's why I'm sitting in Minnesota today.
Mm-hmm.
It's because Kristen wanted to go to Bethel. And then Jason ended up going to Bethel as well. But for me, it was a huge crisis because I didn't have the money to pay for Bethel. We were going to have to do a lot of loans and debt and things. And so for me, it was like, there's a community college, like
just lower your
right next to our church.
Yeah.
There's a community college. Can't you just go there for a couple of years, and then we'll only have 2 years to pay for this. And Kathy, for my Kathy, she was like, she has a spiritual north that's unbelievable, and she just immediately said, yes, we got to do this, and for me, it was like, no, I'm not on this bandwagon just yet. And so it took some real time for me to pray about this and to, get to that point. And so finally I decided, okay, I guess, we're going to do this, and we're just going to have to trust that God's going to take care of us, because we aren't
our own natural means.
In our own, we didn't have the means.
We don't have enough.
And that was at about the same time that this was happening at work, and Len said, hey, he was giving me a bonus that was going toward ownership in the company, but it had to go toward buying stock in the company.
ESOP, where it was.
And that year, he came to me and said, hey, here's this bonus. You can use all of it or part of it to buy stock, or you can use it for
Take some
whatever.
liquidity.
Right. Take some liquidity. And that was our answer.
Wow.
Could
never plan on it.
We did not plan on that. And it just examples of what God does.
Yeah.
And
I think
here's the one thing that was like, my daughter Kristen started in school. She managed to get into the highest level of choir because she was quite a good singer. In the first 6 weeks of being at school, she was on stage singing backup with the choir with Twyla Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, now that would not have happened at the community college.
No.
And there's like, she has just barely started school and she's on stage with Twyla Paris singing Christian music. So it was like, to me, that was like the slam dunk of, yep, God is just confirming that this was a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to fast forward in time. Once you've built the foundation, once you've seen the fruit of the actions, but if you're truly interested in how to replicate it, you have to go back to the roots of how the building was built, how the feat was accomplished. And it always stuck out to me. Some of these things are what you're sharing is, I remember you sharing that you had put these boundaries around your work and how God blessed and honored that. And from somebody that came from no business background, no investing background of any kind, who made, I think, late 90s, you'd have been making $75,000, $80,000, which was enough to take care of the family. And, we never went for want, but it was one pair of shoes, two pair,
Yeah.
What you needed is what you got. And you had your toys and video games and stuff, but by no means did we have excess. But how God honored that and really in many ways put us as a family in a position to do some of the things that we're doing today.
Yeah.
But it all started from very, very humble roots and some very intentional decisions based on your faith, based on the things that you learned and decided from your spiritual walk.
Yeah. We when I look at the things that have happened to us, by God's hand, I never imagined or planned or even aspired to the things that God has done. And I can't even explain it, because, it's just the hand of God.
Well, I think there's plenty more adventures that we could touch on and share. Just that kind of actually that next stage you alluded to at the beginning, which is as you had this liquidity, figuring out now, coming from having had no money pretty much ever to invest or on the side, how to do that, how to basically next level your life, how to steward that at the next level, how to grow at the next level. I think that'd be a great segue for our next
we should have
episode.
A second podcast to cover that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. Like I said earlier, it's so easy to look at success and say, oh, it's overnight, and kind of miss the really decades, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of foundation that led to even be in a position to be able to go to that next level. So
yeah.
Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being our founding investor, along with Mom, of course.
Yeah.
And we'll be excited to share some of the other as we took a more entrepreneurial path as a family. the many adventures and journeys we went on.
Plenty of adventure.
All right, so well, with that, we'll wrap up, but we'll see you again on the next episode of Take Your Mountain. I'm your host, Jason Weimer. Guest today, Jack Weimer. Have a good one.